My twin gave our dad cigarettes during chemo while collecting $30,000 in caregiver benefits and posting about being his devoted advocate. When I confronted her, she leaned into the mic and whispered, "You just exposed everything. Dad's going to kill you when he finds out." I stayed silent. That was 2 years ago. This morning, she sent me a letter from prison demanding her rightful inheritance. Me and my girls were in my bedroom, sucking the life out of our mango jewels when I burst into tears because through the window was my bitch-ass twin sister, pressing a cigarette between Dad's chemo-shaken fingers. "One more won't hurt," she cooed, flicking her lighter. This was the same twin who received $2,500 a month in caregiver benefits. The same twin who was about to graduate as a radiation therapist. Like, hello? "I'm going to fucking destroy her," I whispered. "Wait," Layla grabbed my arm. "We need to do this smart." I knew she was right. My sister was the type to blame everything on her autism. The week before, she'd stolen my credit card for Shein hauls because autism makes impulse control impossible. She'd even cheated on her boyfriend and claimed autism made her misread social cues. And if we didn't play our cards right, she'd do the same thing again. Before I could even process what was going on, Mia was on my twin's laptop that she left in my room. "Oh my gosh, she filed for benefits the day after your dad's cancer diagnosis. $30,000. That's what she'd collected while actively trying to kill him." "Pull up her Insta," Ashley demanded. She had me blocked, so Tori had to be the one to find it. I wanted to vomit. Post after post. "Caring for my warrior dad, #cancer caregiver." Her GoFundMe donations tripled after announcing Dad reached stage 3. "Oh my gosh," I whispered as the realization hit me. If Dad gets better, she loses everything. "Girls," Tori's voice was deadly calm, "my cousin works in insurance fraud. Oh, this bitch is going down." The plan formed like a beautiful, vindictive puzzle. We had 3 weeks until her graduation from the radiation therapy program. Layla's brother installed a Ring camera facing the garden. We caught her giving cigarettes to my dad at least twice a day. But the real gold? The video from the family BBQ after everyone had left. You could hear her clear as day. "Your oncologist would murder me." Dad begging, "Please, honey, I'm trying to quit." Her response, "You know how I get when routines change. This is too much for me to handle right now." But prison wasn't enough. I wanted humiliation. "She's giving a speech at graduation," I remembered, "about overcoming autism to help cancer patients." Tori smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. My mom knows the dean. We spent the next 2 weeks building an airtight case. Every receipt, every timestamp, every benefits form where she claimed round-the-clock care duties while she was actually at raves. The night before graduation, we had an emergency sleepover. "Girls, we're not just showing up," Mia announced, dumping her entire makeup collection on my bed. "We're showing up looking so good, she'll know it was US who ended her." Ashley was doing everyone's nails in Dad's favorite blue. Between coats, she kept refreshing my twin's Instagram. "Guys, she just posted her graduation fit. It's giving Amazon." We screamed. We spent the rest of the night practicing our poker faces in the mirror. "Remember," Mia said, applying her 3rd coat of mascara, "we need to look shocked but not surprised, like we're disappointed but not involved." By 3 a.m., we'd decided on matching silk dresses, slicked back buns, and nude lips. Classy, devastating, the kind of coordinated look that makes people know you came to end someone. Graduation day was gorgeous. My twin wore her honors cords, beaming in her cap and gown. The auditorium was packed. She'd invited everyone. She walked across that stage like she owned it. "Emily Williams," the dean called. She reached for her diploma. "Miss Williams, please step aside." The whole auditorium went silent. 2 investigators flanked the stage. The dean's mic was still hot. "There's been a serious allegation regarding fraudulent caregiver benefits." Her face. "Oh my gosh," her face. "This is a mistake," she stammered. "My autism makes certain things difficult to." "Ma'am, we have video evidence of you providing cigarettes to your cancer patient father while collecting $30,000 in benefits." Someone gasped. Phones came out everywhere. Her favorite professor from the radiation therapy program stood up and walked out. The honors cords looked like they were choking her. "Additionally," the investigator continued, "you're under investigation for practicing medical fraud. Telling a cancer patient nicotine helps with nausea while training to be a radiation therapist." Her carefully curated image, the brave autism advocate caring for her sick father while pursuing radiation therapy, destroyed in real time. She stared at me with pure hatred. "You stupid bitch," she whispered into the hot mic. "You just exposed everything. Dad's going to kill you when he finds out." Then she ran. I thought she meant metaphorically. I was wrong. 3 hours later, Dad was shaking in the hospital waiting room while Dr. Martinez rushed his emergency blood work. His hands kept trembling as he tried to explain how Emily told him cigarettes helped with nausea, how she'd researched it for her radiation therapy classes, how he trusted her because she was studying to help cancer patients. The nurses kept checking on him every few minutes while I held his hand and tried not to cry. Tori's phone buzzed with screenshots from her cousin showing Emily's search history on the family computer from 2 months ago. Searches for how much nicotine to give a cancer patient without killing them, and whether you could go to jail for slowly poisoning someone. My stomach dropped as I scrolled through dozens of searches, each one more scary than the last. That night we couldn't sleep, so we sat in my room with Dad's laptop going through months of Ring camera footage, watching Emily hand him cigarettes at least twice every single day, sometimes 3 times, always when nobody else was around. Dad was in a hospital bed down the hall, hooked up to machines that beeped every few seconds while his body fought the nicotine poisoning on top of the cancer. The next morning my phone exploded with notifications because Emily had posted bail using the leftover benefit money and was already on Instagram claiming we set her up and that her autism was being weaponized against a disabled woman. Within 2 hours, she had 3,000 likes and hundreds of comments calling us monsters. Then she showed up at the hospital during Dad's chemo session with a whole camera crew from some disability rights group, standing in the hallway telling everyone this was her father who she'd cared for despite her challenges, and now we were trying to criminalize her autism. Security dragged her out, but not before half the nurses saw everything and started whispering whenever we walked by, and some disability advocate was live tweeting about how an ableist family family was destroying an autistic woman's life. I ran to the bathroom and just lost it, sobbing into paper towels until Mia found me and pulled me into the tightest hug while I kept saying she was turning everything around and making us the bad guys. Mia kept telling me we had the evidence and truth would win, but I could see she was scared too. 3 days later, the detective called with the worst news yet because Amelie's lawyer was arguing her autism meant she couldn't form criminal intent, and the disability rights group was threatening to make this a national news story. Dad's blood work came back showing nicotine levels so high they'd been messing with his chemo for months, and Dr. Martinez sat us down to explain this had significantly reduced his chances of getting better. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and when I opened it, my whole body went cold because it was Amelie saying drop the charges or she'd tell everyone about Mom's death, that she knew what I knew. And suddenly I couldn't breathe because she was threatening to destroy the one secret that could ruin everything. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my phone and Layla grabbed it before I could pick it up. She read the text and her face went white and she pulled me into the hallway away from everyone else. We needed to figure out what Amelie knew about Mom and fast. Layla drove us to my house while I tried not to throw up in her car. The attic was dusty and hot and we had to move boxes of Christmas decorations to get to Mom's stuff. I found the medical records in a plastic bin marked with her name and my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I opened it. There were hospital bills and prescription bottles and discharge papers from 3 different psych wards. Layla was reading over my shoulder when she found the bipolar diagnosis from 2 months before Mom died. The paper said she needed to take her meds every day, or she could have manic episodes that made her do dangerous things. I showed Layla the police report from that night and pointed to where it said Dad had hidden Mom's pills in his gun safe. Mom had found them anyway and taken the whole bottle at once. The cops ruled it accidental because Dad told them she must have forgotten she already took her dose. But I knew Dad blamed himself for hiding the pills where she could still find them. Amelie must have gone through these same papers and figured out Dad lied to the cops about it being an accident. Ashley texted us asking where we went and we told her to come over right away with her laptop. She showed up 20 minutes later with Mia and Tori and they helped us go through more boxes. Ashley opened her laptop and started making a spreadsheet of every dollar Amelie stole from the caregiver money. She found receipts from Coachella and EDC and Burning Man all paid with the debit card linked to the benefits account. There were Gucci bags and Louis Vuitton shoes and a whole wardrobe from Revolve that cost more than my car. Ashley's spreadsheet showed Amelie spent $28,000 on herself and only $2,000 on actual stuff for Dad. We took pictures of everything, and Ashley emailed copies to Detective Coleman and the prosecutor handling Amelie's case. Amelie's timing seems way too perfect. Filing for benefits the exact day after the diagnosis? That takes some serious planning, which makes me wonder if she somehow knew about Dad's cancer before everyone else did. A week later, Tori's mom called to say she talked to the director of the disability rights group about Amelie. The director had already seen the news about the graduation arrest and was planning to drop Amelie anyway. But when Tori's mom showed her the evidence about the cigarettes, the director got really mad. She said autism doesn't make someone poison their own father, and she was going to make sure everyone knew it. The group put out a statement saying they don't support people who use disability as an excuse to hurt others. Amelie lost her biggest defenders, and her Instagram followers started dropping by the thousands every day. 2 days after that, I was sitting with Dad during his chemo treatment when a social worker walked in. She said she was from Child Protective Services and needed to investigate a report of elder abuse and child endangerment. Dad looked confused and asked what was going on, and she said someone reported me for abusing a disabled person. The report claimed I was denying medical care to my father and emotionally abusing my sister who has autism. Dad's face turned red, and he told the social worker this was ridiculous, and that I was the only one taking care of him. She said she still had to do an investigation, and asked to speak to Dad alone in another room. They were gone for over an hour, and I sat there crying while the chemo nurses kept checking on me. When they came back, the social worker looked annoyed and told me the allegations appeared to be made in retaliation. She said Dad was very clear about who had been helping him and who had been giving him cigarettes. The social worker said she was closing the case and marking it as a false report, which could get Amelie in more trouble. 2 weeks went by, and Amelie's lawyer filed papers saying she couldn't understand what was happening because of her autism. He wanted the judge to throw out the whole case or at least delay it for competency testing. The judge scheduled a hearing, but the prosecutor said this was just another manipulation tactic. Meanwhile, Dad's oncologist called me into his office after Dad's appointment and closed the door behind us. He showed me Dad's latest scans and pointed to areas where the tumors had grown more than expected. He said the nicotine exposure had reduced the effectiveness of the chemo and complicated Dad's treatment significantly. The survival rate dropped from 60% to 30%, but he said we shouldn't tell Dad yet. I went to the bathroom and threw up and then sat on the floor crying for 20 minutes. Detective Coleman called the next day with huge news about Amelie taking out a life insurance policy on Dad. She'd done it 6 months ago and made herself the only beneficiary for $500,000. The detective said this showed premeditation and meant Amelie could face attempted murder charges instead of just fraud. That same afternoon, I got an Instagram message from someone named Michael, who said he dated Amelie in college. He said he had recordings of her bragging about using her autism diagnosis to get away with stuff. We agreed to meet at a Starbucks near campus, and I brought Layla and Ashley for backup. Michael looked nervous and kept checking over his shoulder like he was scared Amelie might show up. He pulled out his phone and played us audio recordings from when they were dating 2 years ago. You could hear Amelie laughing and saying autism was her get-out-of-jail-free card for everything. She talked about how she practiced crying on command and knew exactly what to say to make people feel sorry for her. In one recording, she said she cheated on Michael with 3 different guys and blamed it on not understanding social cues. Michael said she would study autism symptoms online and practice acting them out in the mirror. He had videos of her doing completely normal stuff and then switching into her autism act when other people showed up. She would start rocking back and forth and avoiding eye contact even though she'd been fine seconds before. Michael said he kept all the recordings after they broke up because she threatened to tell people he abused her. He was scared to come forward before, but seeing what she did to her own dad made him realize she had to be stopped. The competency hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later, and when we walked into that courtroom, I almost didn't recognize my sister. She was in a wheelchair she definitely didn't need, wearing pigtails like she was 5 years old, and speaking in this baby voice none of us had ever heard before. Even her lawyer kept shifting in his seat, looking uncomfortable as she rocked back and forth, making these weird humming sounds. The prosecutor brought in this autism specialist from UCLA who'd reviewed all of Amelie's medical records and watched hours of footage we'd collected. He testified that her behavior patterns were completely inconsistent with autism and showed clear signs of someone pretending to have more severe symptoms than they actually had. He pulled up her college transcripts showing straight A's in complex science courses and compared them to her current claim that she couldn't understand basic legal concepts. The judge took notes while Amelie kept interrupting with these fake crying sounds that sounded more like a toddler than a grown woman. Over the next month, while the legal stuff dragged on, Dad started getting worse, and it wasn't just the cancer anymore. He'd lost 20 pounds and could barely make it to the mailbox without having to sit down on the porch steps to catch his breath. Dr. Martinez said the stress was making his treatment less effective, and his white blood cell count kept dropping. That's when Detective Coleman called with more evidence because Amelie's old roommate from freshman year had reached out with screenshots from their group chat. The texts were from 3 years ago, where Amelie literally wrote about how she was going to milk Dad's eventual illness for everything once he got older, and how cancer runs in our family, so she just had to wait. One message said she'd already looked up how much caregiver benefits paid and was planning to use the money for a house down payment. I couldn't sleep after reading those and went downstairs at 3 in the morning to find Dad sitting in the garden with a box of old photos spread across the patio table. He was holding a picture from when we were babies and crying so hard his whole body shook. When I sat next to him, he just kept saying he failed us both, and maybe if he'd been a better father, Amelie wouldn't have turned out this way. I held him while he sobbed, and I could feel how thin he'd gotten through his pajamas. The next morning, Tori's brother, who works in IT, said he'd gotten into Amelie's cloud storage through an old shared family account she forgot to disconnect. What he found made everyone in the room go silent because there were Google searches from 6 months before Dad's diagnosis, asking about stage 3 lung cancer survival rates and inheritance laws in Arizona. She'd bookmarked articles about how to become a legal caregiver and downloaded forms for disability benefits claims. She'd even researched which cancers qualified for the most government assistance and saved a spreadsheet calculating potential payouts. The insurance company launched their own investigation after we sent them everything, and within 2 days they'd frozen all of Amelie's accounts, including the one where she kept the $30,000 in benefits. Her fancy lawyer dropped her immediately when the retainer check bounced, and she got assigned some overworked public defender who looked about 12 years old. That must have made her snap because we came home from Dad's chemo appointment to find our front door kicked in and my bedroom completely destroyed. She'd thrown paint all over my walls and spray painted ableist bitches across my closet doors in huge red letters. The Ring camera caught everything, including her smashing my laptop with a hammer and ripping up all the physical documents we'd collected. She even poured bleach on my clothes and cut up the blue dress I'd worn to graduation. The cops arrested her that night at her apartment, where she'd barricaded herself in the bathroom, claiming we were persecuting her for her disability. 6 weeks into all the legal proceedings, the judge finally ruled that Amelie was competent to stand trial after reviewing all the evidence and expert testimony. Her public defender immediately tried to work out a plea deal, but the prosecutor wanted maximum charges for elder abuse, fraud, and breaking and entering. Dad shocked everyone by insisting he wanted to testify, even though Dr. Martinez warned him that the stress could seriously impact his treatment. He said Amelie needed to hear directly from him what she'd done to our family, and maybe if she heard it from him, she'd finally understand the damage she'd caused. The prosecutor's office called 3 days later with news that made my stomach drop to the floor. They'd been testing Dad's protein powder containers from our kitchen as part of the investigation. The lab tech found traces of something that shouldn't have been there: antifreeze. Small amounts mixed into the vanilla powder that Dad drank every morning for the past 6 months. Not enough to kill him fast, but enough to make his kidneys work harder, and his symptoms look way worse. The detective showed us the lab results with all these chemical names I couldn't pronounce. Ethylene glycol levels in Dad's blood samples from his last 3 hospital visits. The prosecutor's face was grim when she explained what this meant. First-degree attempted murder charges, 25 years to life. Dad collapsed when they told him. We rushed him back to the hospital where doctors ran more tests and confirmed the poisoning. His kidneys were failing from the combination of chemo and antifreeze. They hooked him up to a dialysis machine that would clean his blood 3 times a week. Michael keeping those recordings like insurance turned out to be the smartest breakup move ever. Talk about receipts. Though honestly, practicing autism symptoms in the mirror takes dedication that could have been used for literally anything else productive. I sat next to his bed watching the machine pull poison from his body while he stared at the ceiling. She wanted me dead for money, he whispered. The court ordered 3 different psychiatrists to evaluate Amelie's autism diagnosis after this new evidence came out. Over the next 2 weeks, they interviewed her teachers and old friends and reviewed years of medical records. All 3 came to the same conclusion. She didn't have autism at all. She had narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features. She'd been faking the autism symptoms for years to avoid consequences for her actions. 2 months into the legal proceedings, my friends decided we needed to help Dad with his mounting medical bills. Layla organized a fundraiser at our college while Mia made flyers, and Ashley set up an online donation page. Tori reached out to local news stations who'd been following the case. The response was incredible. Even people who donated to Amelie's fake fundraiser sent money. We raised $40,000 in 3 weeks. The community rallied around Dad in ways we never expected. Local restaurants brought meals and neighbors offered to drive him to appointments. Then Amelie made the worst decision of her life. life. She fired her public defender and announced she would represent herself. The judge tried to talk her out of it, but she insisted she knew the law better than anyone. Her opening statement at the preliminary hearing was a disaster. She rambled for 20 minutes about conspiracy theories and how everyone was jealous of her success. She tried to cry, but no tears came out. She accused me of planting the antifreeze and claimed the lab results were fake. The radiation therapy program director took the stand next and destroyed what was left of Amelie's reputation. She testified that Amelie had been caught falsifying patient interaction logs 3 separate times. She'd lied about completing required clinical hours and forged supervisor signatures on evaluation forms. They were going to expel her the week after graduation anyway. The program had already notified the licensing board about her violations. I spent every other day at the hospital during Dad's dialysis treatments. 4 hours watching a machine clean poison from his blood while cancer kept eating away at his body. He'd aged 10 years in 2 months. His hair was gone and his skin looked gray and his hands shook constantly. The nurses knew our names and brought us extra blankets. I read him books and showed him funny videos on my phone. We didn't talk about Amelie. During her cross-examination of the detective, Amelie made a fatal mistake. She was trying to prove the nicotine wasn't harmful when she blurted out that she knew exactly how it interfered with chemotherapy. I researched it extensively for my thesis on treatment inhibitors, she said. The whole courtroom went silent. The prosecutor immediately requested her thesis from the college. It arrived the next day. How environmental factors can inhibit cancer treatment efficacy, with an entire chapter about how nicotine blocks chemo drugs from working. She'd written 30 pages about the exact mechanism of how cigarettes make cancer treatment fail. The prosecutor entered it into evidence while Amelie stood there realizing what she'd just done. 3 months dragged by with more court dates than I could count, and each one felt worse than the last. The prosecutor called me one morning to come to the hospital because Dad's oncologist needed to testify. I walked into that sterile room and almost collapsed when I saw Dad hooked up to twice as many machines as before. Dr. Martinez stood by his bed with charts showing how Dad went from stage 3 to stage 4 in just 3 months. The doctor pointed at scan after scan, showing tumors that had spread to Dad's liver and bones. He couldn't say exactly how much the nicotine poisoning sped things up, but he kept shaking his head and saying it definitely made everything worse. The next week they brought in Michael, Amelie's ex-boyfriend from 2 years ago. He sat in that witness chair looking exhausted and started telling the jury about all the crazy stuff she'd done to him. He pulled out old text messages showing how she'd faked being pregnant to keep him from breaking up with her. Then when he tried to leave anyway, she told everyone she'd had a miscarriage because of his emotional abuse. The prosecutor asked if she'd ever mentioned her autism during their relationship. Michael laughed bitterly and said she only started claiming that after they broke up and she needed sympathy from her next boyfriend. That's when Amelie completely lost it in the courtroom. She jumped up from her chair and started screaming that we were all just jealous of her success. She pointed at me and yelled that Dad deserved what he got for loving her more than me. The judge kept banging his gavel, but she wouldn't stop. She screamed that I was the one who should be on trial for turning everyone against her. 2 bailiffs had to physically restrain her while the jury sat there with their mouths open. One juror actually scooted her chair back like she was afraid Amelie might attack someone. The judge called a recess, and when we came back, the detective had set up a whole presentation about Amelie's computer searches. She'd been using library computers thinking she was being smart, but they'd pulled everything. There on the screen for everyone to see were searches for how much inheritance tax on $500K from 2 weeks after Dad's diagnosis, then average life insurance payout timeline, and how long stage 3 cancer patients live, and can nicotine speed up cancer death. The worst one was how to act sad at funeral, which she'd searched the same day she'd posted on Instagram about being Dad's devoted caregiver. After that day in court, Dad asked me to come home alone without my friends. He was in his recliner with oxygen tubes in his nose, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He pushed a stack of papers across the coffee table with shaking hands. It was medical power of attorney forms, making me the only person who could make his health decisions. Then he showed me his new will where Amelie's name had been completely removed. He looked at me with tears in his eyes and said he only had 2 daughters now, me and Mom's memory. I held his hand while he cried about how he'd failed to see what Amelie really was. The trial kept going, and more people kept coming forward with stories about Amelie. This girl named Hannah, who'd been Amelie's best friend in high school, showed up with a whole box of Amelie's old diaries. The prosecutor read entries out loud where Amelie had written about practicing crying in the mirror to look more believable. Another entry talked about watching YouTube videos of autistic people so she could copy their behaviors. She'd written a whole list of symptoms to fake during her diagnosis appointment. The autism specialist who diagnosed her had to testify next, and he looked like he wanted to disappear. He admitted he'd only met with Amelie once for an hour and had based his whole diagnosis on what she'd told him. He said she'd been very convincing with all the right symptoms and behaviors. Now his license was under review, and 3 other patients he'd diagnosed were being reevaluated. By the 4th month of the trial, Dad couldn't come to court anymore. The hospice nurse came to our house and set up a hospital bed in the living room. She explained that the nicotine poisoning had made his body too weak to fight the cancer properly. We probably had a few weeks, maybe a month if we were lucky. I sat next to his bed every day when I wasn't in court, watching him get thinner and weaker. He kept apologizing for not protecting me from Amelie, even though I told him it wasn't his fault. During the next court date, Amelie tried to make a run for it during a bathroom break. The bailiff had walked her to the restroom and was waiting outside when she somehow slipped out a different door. Security cameras showed her sprinting through the parking lot in her pencil skirt and heels. She made it about 50 feet before 2 bailiffs tackled her onto the asphalt. They dragged her back into court with scraped knees and her hair all messed up. The judge revoked her bail right there and ordered her held in custody for the rest of the trial. She sat there in her orange jumpsuit for the closing arguments, not even trying to look sympathetic anymore. When the jury went to deliberate, the prosecutor told me it would probably take days to go through all the charges. 3 hours later, they were back. The foreman stood up and read guilty on every single count. Attempted murder, guilty. Elder abuse, guilty. Fraud, guilty. Identity theft for using dad's information to open credit cards, guilty. Emily didn't cry or scream or anything. She just turned in her chair and stared at me with this cold, dead look in her eyes, like she was memorizing my face for later. 6 weeks later, we were back in the same courtroom for sentencing, and Dad insisted on giving his victim impact statement, even though he could barely sit up anymore. The prosecutor had set up a laptop so Dad could speak from his hospice bed, and when his face appeared on the courtroom screen, everyone went silent. His skin was gray, and his eyes were sunken, but his voice was clear when he looked straight at Emily and said those 5 words that made her finally break down crying. The bailiff had to hold her up as Dad explained how the cigarettes had destroyed his lungs faster than the cancer ever could have, and how he'd never see me graduate or get married now. 2 days after that, the prosecutor called me at 3 in the morning because Emily's cellmate had contacted them about something huge. Turns out Emily had been trying to pay someone $5,000 from her commissary account to quote-unquote take care of me and the other witnesses before sentencing, paying someone from her commissary account to take care of witnesses. That's oddly specific planning for someone who just got caught representing herself so badly. Makes me wonder if she's always had these connections, or if this is just desperate scrambling from someone who finally ran out of clever moves to make. The cellmate had recordings on her phone of Emily describing exactly how she wanted it done and which order she wanted us heard in, with me being saved for last. They filed conspiracy charges that same morning and moved her to maximum security while they investigated and found she'd been asking multiple inmates over the past month. The judge looked disgusted when we came back for the new sentencing hearing 3 days later with all the additional charges added. She spent 20 minutes going through every single thing Emily had done, from the benefits fraud to poisoning Dad to trying to arrange hits from jail. When she finally announced 35 years to life with no parole for 25 years, Emily just stared at the ceiling like she couldn't process it. The judge leaned forward and told her this was the worst case of family betrayal she'd seen in 2 decades of criminal law. We brought Dad home from the hospice facility the next week because he wanted to die in his own bed, and the house felt different without Emily's stuff everywhere. Lighter, but also heavier, because we all knew what was coming and couldn't stop it, no matter how many machines we hooked him up to. The prison called to tell us they'd moved Emily to solitary confinement after finding out she'd been paying other inmates to write threatening letters to us. She'd spent $800 from her commissary account just on stamps and was promising more money to anyone who would help her get revenge. 2 weeks after sentencing, Dad asked me to bring down the box of old VHS tapes from the attic, and we spent the afternoon watching videos from before Mom died. There was one of me and Emily at our 5th birthday party fighting over who got to blow out the candles first, and Dad kept rewinding it. He whispered something about looking for signs and wondering if they were always there, but I couldn't answer because I was wondering the same thing. Dr. Martinez came by the next morning to check Dad's pain medication and pulled me aside in the kitchen while Dad was sleeping. He said the nicotine poisoning had damaged too many organs for Dad's body to fight anymore, and we had days, not weeks left. I called the girls and they came over immediately to help me process what the doctor had said while Dad slept upstairs. The insurance company sent a letter that same day saying they were suing Emily's estate for the $30,000 in fraudulent benefits plus interest and penalties. Since she had no money or assets left, they were garnishing her prison wages at 15 cents an hour, which meant she'd be paying them back for literally the next 100 years. Layla and Mia and Ashley and Tori started taking shifts staying with us after that, so I was never alone with all the medical equipment. They handled the oxygen tanks and IV bags and medication schedules, while I just got to sit with Dad and hold his hand and be his daughter. On his last good day, Dad asked me to set up my phone to record a video message for Emily, even though I wanted to throw the phone across the room. He looked straight at the camera and said he forgave her, but could never forget what she'd done, and that he hoped prison would teach her the empathy she never learned from him. He died 2 days later at 4:17 in the morning with me holding one hand and Layla holding the other while the sunrise came through the window. The funeral home wanted $3,000 just to cremate him, and I almost laughed because that was exactly 1 month of Emily's fraud money. A month after her sentencing, the disability rights organization that had championed her sent a letter with a $10,000 check saying they were sorry for supporting someone who weaponized autism against vulnerable people, and the money would go to Dad's hospice bills, except there weren't any hospice bills because Dad died in a regular hospital room. Michael texted me a zip file of recordings he'd made of Emily over the years where she bragged about faking meltdowns and using her diagnosis to get out of everything from parking tickets to cheating on tests, and I listened to about 30 seconds before deleting the whole thing because I didn't need that poison in my head anymore. The weird thing was remembering Dad's last good day, which happened 3 weeks before he died when he suddenly felt strong enough to sit at the dinner table, and Layla brought her mom's tamales, and Mia made her grandma's mac and cheese, and Ashley ordered Korean BBQ, and Tori got Vietnamese spring rolls, and we all sat around eating like a real family, while Dad told stories about when me and Emily were babies, and for those 2 hours it was like having a dad again instead of a dying man. That night, after everyone left, he pulled me close and whispered about the life insurance policy he'd kept secret from everyone, including Emily, and how it was worth $500,000 and would let me finish college and start fresh somewhere she couldn't find me, and he made me promise not to let her shadow follow me forever. The radiation therapy program sent a letter saying they were creating new screening procedures to prevent future students from exploiting patients, and they were naming it the Robert Williams Protocol, which made me cry harder than his actual death. 2 weeks before he died, his breathing got so bad, we had to readmit him, and the nurses who'd been following our story on social media brought me coffee and blankets, and sat with me during the long nights when his oxygen levels kept dropping. I spent one whole night writing Emily a letter I knew I'd never send, telling her about Dad's last jokes, and how he'd forgiven her, and how peaceful he looked when he wasn't struggling to breathe, and how the nurses said he was the bravest patient they'd ever had. Dr. Martinez testified at some medical board hearing about about the importance of screening caregivers, and used Emily's case as an example of how family members can become the biggest threat to patient recovery, and apparently now they teach about her in medical schools as a cautionary tale. The morphine made Dad see things that weren't there, and he kept reaching for someone invisible and smiling, and one time he grabbed my hand so tight it hurt and said to tell Mom he was sorry about the pills and that he tried to save her, and I had no idea what pills he meant, but I said I'd tell her anyway. On his last night, I climbed into the hospital bed next to him like I used to when I was 5 and scared of thunderstorms, except now he was the scared one, but he still tried to make me feel better by stroking my hair and telling me I was the strong one, and always had been, even when Emily made everyone think she was the special one who needed protecting. The next morning, the hospice social worker knocked on our door with a clipboard and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, and she sat down next to Dad's bed and asked what kind of send-off he wanted. Dad looked right at me and said he wanted a mariachi band so loud that Emily could hear it from prison, and the social worker didn't even blink, just wrote it down and asked what else. We spent the next hour planning the most ridiculous funeral Phoenix had ever seen, with his favorite Mexican restaurant catering, and a playlist that was basically just Vicente Fernandez on repeat, and Dad kept squeezing my hand every time we added something new to the list. 2 months passed in this weird blur of good days and bad days and morphine doses, and trying to get Dad to eat anything at all when Detective Coleman showed up at the hospice with news about Emily's conspiracy trial. She sat in the visitor's chair and told me they'd set the date, and with all the evidence we'd gathered, plus the new stuff they'd found, she was looking at another 10 to 15 years minimum on top of what she already got. I felt nothing when she said it. Not happy or sad or satisfied, just this weird empty feeling like someone had scooped out my insides and forgot to put them back. That night, Dad had one of his clear moments where the fog lifted and he could actually focus on my face, and he grabbed my hand with more strength than I thought he had left. He told me not to carry guilt for Emily's choices, and that I'd saved what was left of his life by exposing her, and that he needed me to promise I'd forgive myself for everything. I was crying so hard I could barely see his face, but I promised, and he smiled this tiny smile and closed his eyes. 3 days later, at exactly 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, Dad took his last breath while I held his hand, and Layla held my other hand, and Mia and Ashley and Tori sat around the bed like some kind of protective circle. His breathing just got slower and slower until it stopped, and the nurse came in and checked his pulse and nodded at me, and that was it. The funeral home picked him up 2 hours later, and I signed papers. I don't even remember signing, and picked out a casket that cost more than my car, because Dad deserved the best, even if he couldn't see it. 3 days after that, we held the funeral, and I couldn't believe how many people showed up, like the entire cancer ward nursing staff and doctors from 3 different hospitals, and people from his support group I'd never even met. The prosecutor was there in the back row, and Detective Coleman brought flowers, and even Dad's old boss from before he got sick drove down from Flagstaff to pay respects. Emily's lawyer called that morning to say she'd requested compassionate release to attend, but the judge denied it immediately given the nature of her crimes against the deceased. During the eulogy, I pulled out the letter Dad had written to Emily when he first found out what she'd done and read it out loud to everyone. He'd written about how he loved her despite everything, and how he hoped she'd find peace someday, but that he couldn't forgive putting his life at risk for money, and how that betrayal cut deeper than the cancer ever could. People were crying so hard the funeral director had to pass out extra tissues twice, and Dad's oncologist had to leave the room when I got to the part about the cigarettes. Dad spent his last days planning a mariachi funeral loud enough for prison walls to hear while forgiving the daughter who poisoned him. That's either the biggest heart or the ultimate parental mic drop in history. We buried him next to Mom at the cemetery on Baseline Road with a headstone that said, "Together again in peace," and I left a photo from when we were kids, all 4 of us at the Grand Canyon before everything went wrong. The life insurance check came through faster than I expected, a week after the funeral, and I sat in my apartment staring at more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I set aside enough for therapy because I definitely needed it, and wrote a check for $50,000 to the cancer center in Dad's name, and they called me crying, saying it would fund their new patient comfort room. The rest went into savings to rebuild a life that didn't have family shadows hanging over everything I did. Then Emily's letter arrived through her lawyer. Not a single word about being sorry Dad was dead or acknowledging what she'd done, just demanding her rightful share of any inheritance and threatening to sue me if I didn't comply. Her lawyer actually withdrew from representing her after reading what she wanted him to send, and called me personally to apologize for even having to deliver it. A month after the funeral, the conspiracy trial happened without me there, since I'd already given my testimony through a deposition where I had to relive everything again for the court record. The prosecutor called that afternoon to tell me the jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding her guilty on all counts, and the judge gave her 15 years consecutive to her current sentence, which meant she wouldn't be eligible for parole until she was almost 60. The therapist's office had those weird leather chairs that made noise every time I moved. She specialized in family trauma and kept nodding as I told her everything about Emily and Dad. After 3 sessions, she looked me straight in the eye and said my sister was sick in ways that had nothing to do with autism. 2 weeks later, I finally went back to Dad's house to clean out his room. Under his mattress, I found this letter dated 2 months before we caught Emily with the cigarettes. His handwriting was shaky, but I could read every word begging her to stop hurting him. He knew the whole time, but loved her anyway, which made everything worse. The house sold faster than expected to this young family with twin boys. While packing up the attic, I found Emily's diary from when we were kids hidden behind old Christmas decorations. Page after page showed her practicing different handwriting styles and creating whole fake personalities like she was trying on Halloween costumes. She'd write the same story 5 different ways depending on who she wanted to manipulate. My friends showed up with a U-Haul the next weekend to help me move into a studio apartment near ASU. Layla kept saying I was going to save lives as a nurse while we carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs. The place was tiny, but it was mine, and Emily had never been there. 3 3 months after Dad died, I went to the courthouse and legally changed my last name to Smith, which was Mom's maiden name. The clerk didn't even ask why when she saw Williams on the death certificate. I started using Smith on everything, and it felt like shedding poisoned skin. The first anniversary of the graduation disaster came on a sunny Tuesday. I drove to Dad's grave with fresh sunflowers and sat there telling him about my 4.0 GPA and the therapy dog I was adopting next week. The headstone just said Robert Williams, beloved father, which felt like the biggest lie ever carved in stone. That night, Michael texted me from a number I didn't recognize. He said Amelie's prison nickname was Faker, and even the other inmates avoided her because criminals have limits. I wished him well and blocked the number immediately. 2 years flew by with clinicals and exams and study groups. Graduation day, I wore Dad's favorite blue in my honor cords, while my chosen family filled the seats where blood relatives should have been. Ashley brought a sign that said future lifesaver, and Mia ugly cried through the whole ceremony. My first shift in the oncology ward started at 6 a.m. on a Monday. By lunch, I was sitting with a young woman sobbing over her father's stage 2 diagnosis. I gave her every resource and support group I wished someone had given us before Amelie destroyed everything. She hugged me and said I was exactly who she needed to meet that day. 6 months into working oncology, I got a thick envelope from the state prison with Amelie's prisoner number on it. Without opening it, I drove to our old house where the new family let me use the backyard. I lit the envelope on fire in Dad's old BBQ spot and watched the pages curl into black ash. My rescue dog Bailey ran circles around the garden where Mom's roses used to grow. The new family had planted vegetables and the whole space felt alive again instead of poisoned. The smoke carried away whatever manipulation and blame Amelie had written. I scattered the ashes in the garbage and drove back to my apartment where Bailey had already destroyed my new running shoes. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was real, and Amelie couldn't touch any of it from behind bars. Alright guys, that's gonna wrap it up for today. Seriously, what a ride. Thanks for hanging out with me and going through all those twists and turns together. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.